Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Tori. I'm on the marketing team here at NetSPI. I'm excited to be here, kind of moderating today's panel. So today, during today's webinar, our esteemed panel of NetSPI cybersecurity leaders will be looking forward to 2022, pulling from their decades of experience and daily conversations with some of the most prominent organizations across the globe. They will tackle some of the most debated topics of the past year, from application security to ransomware to budget allocation and everything in between. If you have any questions during the webinar or would like to share your own predictions in the chat box, feel free to submit those either through the actual questions portal or through the live chat box, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. You can also email info@netspy.com or reach out to us via social media at NetSPI. And that's about it. We'll get to those questions at the very, very end, but let's get started with a few introductions. Nabil, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you, Tori. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Nabil Hannan. I work as a managing director at NetSPI. I have 15 plus years of experience in the application security space, primarily focused in the financial services sector. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts and predictions with my colleagues today. Florindo, I think you're next.
Hi, I'm Florindo. I am the Managing Director and Head of Strategic Solutions Group here at NetSPI. Been in the business over 30 years, started out stealing the information as part of the Intel collection community, and then onto the commercial side. I'm really happy to be here and can't wait to share some anecdotes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Travis Hoyt, Chief Technology Officer here at NetSPI. I have been in the cybersecurity industry for over 20 years, the bulk of it in the financial space, having spent a measure of time at TIA as well as Bank of America.
Awesome. Thanks all of you for joining us. Let's get started. We'll kick it off with Florindo with some predictions around cybersecurity budgets.
Excellent. Thanks, Tori. Budgets, my favorite topic. Throughout my career, budgeting has always been a challenge, and we've had to equate and map, if you will, our budgets to not only our internal requirements, but also what's going out there in the world. And over 2021, even part of 2020 and into 2021, budgets had suffered a pretty big hit, primarily due to companies reallocating that money to work from home technologies, digital transformation, and in particular, business continuity, which was something that kind of surprised me a bit. But yeah, business continuity as well as remote access and so on. My prediction for 2022, I think budgets are going to rebound significantly. Matter of fact, we are starting to see that already. My team heads all of business development for NetSPI, and in our conversations with our clients, we're noticing that they're looking to spend more and more, especially on penetration testing, but in cybersecurity budgets in general, to address some of the vulnerabilities, especially some of the more egregious vulnerabilities that have come out during the pandemic. So while we were all, cooped up in our houses and locked down during the pandemic, the bad guys were not, and they were busy. And so they've uncovered quite a bit. And we noticed now that there's a game of catch up. So budgets are being allocated or allocated back to cybersecurity, and in particular, penetration testing. One last thing also, with regard to the digital transformation, there is still, we noticed, a focus on a risk approach or a risk justification for budgets over just compliance checkboxes that we've seen in the past. More and more companies are, I guess, maturing in their approach to strategizing, especially with regard to budgets, to better build justifications based on risk to the business. So that's something else that we're seeing more. And in fact, when we are proposing our work and working through the business development side with our clients, more and more we are addressing that, which is that risk-based approach to cybersecurity spend than before.
Brenda, do you think this is a transition that's kind of taken too long to get here? Were you expecting this to have happened earlier, or is this more of a trend you're seeing now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nabil. To tell you the truth, once the world started to open up a bit more, set aside the thing about mask mandates and whatnot, but just as we began to open up more and businesses started up again, I expected that spend to skyrocket. Now, the trend did start, I would say, right around, well, according to my notes, the research that I did with our numbers, right around April or May. But I expected more towards January or February of this year, just based on the direction that we have seen in the news, especially in business news and businesses opening up. And we just assumed that, or I had assumed that the transition would happen earlier, but it's taken a little bit longer. But I would say since, well, I'll tell you what, actually Thanksgiving, right around the Thanksgiving time is when we see a dramatic increase in spending, especially on penetration testing.
Yeah, and I think when you look at how that kind of leads into ransomware, which has become a hot topic or continues to be a hot topic, right? Attack surface management. A lot of times you think of those in technology terms, in cybersecurity terms. That tends to be the conversation that's held. But I think these days what we're seeing is that, you know, in mature programs, in mature organizations, CFOs are starting to understand that they've got a lot more skin in the game, right? That this is not just a technology risk. It's not just a cybersecurity risk. I think that you'll see firms start to move away from funding models that represent cybersecurity as a percentage of IT spend. Because to your point, Florendo, it doesn't truly represent the risk governance for an organization or what the potential risk is for an organization. And where we're seeing that, and this is my prediction as it relates a bit to, you know, ransomware certainly, but the cybersecurity, the cyber insurance industry. What we're getting wind of and what we're hearing from some of the insurers out there is that there's a lack of willingness to underwrite policies. There's, you know, that market is drying up. And so when you think about what the impact of that is, that's, you know, that's not just the ability to, you know, transfer risk to your cyber insurance policy for things that you don't account for, or don't mitigate or control. If you're not able to secure that policy, then you're not going to get your COI. If you don't get your COI, then you may have downstream impacts to your business as your clients look to see, do you have the level of cyber insurance that you've committed to in your contracts? So that market's getting very tough, and the underwriters are asking really tough questions. And, you know, and a lot of them are with, you know, holding back on ransomware coverage in general. You may get a policy, but you may have very substantial cutouts. So that's something to be mindful of. It's something to talk to your risk and governance teams. It's something to talk to your CFO about, that, you know, cybersecurity is not just a line item in a budget. It's not just a percentage of spend against IT, but it has much, much more material impact to the business and the rest of the business. So as you look at the kinds of, you know, mitigations and activities that you'll need to do with respect to understanding what do you have, what are your exposures, looking at attack surface management, right? Understanding what you have out there, the penetration testing that Florendo was talking about to understand, you know, what exposure beyond just what you have out there, but what types of vulnerabilities that you have out there. And then looking at what is your, you know, what is your control posture? How are your teams responding to, you know, incursions, and what kind of breach and attack simulation activities are you pursuing? Those I think are all going to be, you know, the kinds of questions that underwriters are going to be asking. It's a much deeper, much more technical set of questions than certainly I have seen them ask historically, and I think it represents the market.
Travis, do you have any predictions or thoughts in terms of whether ransomware is going to be a problem we're going to have to deal with for the foreseeable future, or do you think it's more of a bit of a trend that's going to fade away over time?
I think that is going to depend on whether we see regulatory or legal pressure with respect to paying ransom, right? And we're already starting to see chatter about this, that, you know, there's certainly a lot of discouragement around paying a ransom. For a variety of reasons. One, because it encourages threat actors to continue to do it. Two, you may not get unlocked, right? And even if you get unlocked, they may still expose your data and hold you for ransom again. So I think there's a lot of that. But then, you know, when you look at some of the language that's out there, none of this has made it into legislation here in the US yet, but wouldn't surprise me if it did, where paying ransom is being likened to providing aid and comfort to potential terrorist activity. And if it takes that approach, then it'll become illegal to pay those ransoms, right? And then that creates a very interesting dynamic in how do you handle that. So it's going to be a challenging space. I think the other one that we're already starting to see too is not just ransomware but killware, and I think you'll see and hear a lot more about that, where, you know, people are pursuing the same types of threat activities, but they're not interested in compensation. They're interested in you going away.
Now, to follow up, Travis, to your ransomware comment, this Log4j problem that's surfaced over the past week or so, I'm seeing in the news, and coincidentally, I'm seeing in the news where attackers are now looking to leverage that to send payloads, whether it's ransomware or otherwise, and using it as a conduit of some sort. And it's funny because I read that on Twitter yesterday, and yesterday afternoon, we actually got a call from a customer exactly to your point, saying, we need to know, is this going to happen? Is ransomware going to be a threat? Because our insurance company is asking us already, are we prepared? It's as if, you know, it has become such a focal point in the news that now everyone's jumping on it almost immediately and asking these questions. And that actually took me by surprise yesterday, how quickly both the attacker side, as well as on the cybersecurity and insurance side, how they've all come together and responded so quickly. And I think that shows a maturation, especially on the cybersecurity side.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at and not to associate the two too terribly, but when you look at this and you look at struts, I mean, to me they feel the same. I was around for both, obviously, and this is obviously a lot worse. But one of the things that that I see about this is that, you know, there's a lot that we didn't learn from struts when it comes to asset management. You look at a lot of the same pains that we're seeing today. It's, where do we have this stuff? And we went through those exercises, right? We knows, like, where in the heck do we have struts and which one? And anybody that went through that, they are nodding their head because they're like, yep, absolutely. Well, this is that all over again. Asset management continues to be a extremely big challenge. And I was talking to a client of ours and a good friend of mine this morning about this space, and I told him, I'm like, hey, you know, go out and look at your code repos and find out what other things you have a lot of, whatever it is, you know, because that may be the next one. And, you know, where is it that you've got something that, just because of the nature of what it is and the breadth of deployment, represents the largest blast radius. And I think that, you know, those are the kinds of things that people are going to need to do and understand and think about and really get a good handle on that asset management. Tori, what's next for us? Oh, sorry, Nabil, go
So
ahead.
talking in that vein, I'll share my predictions in the application security side, and I actually have some thoughts around the Log4j, 0-day as well. So the first thing, when I think about application security, and in all honesty, watching application security in conjunction with software development evolve over the last 15 years, we've seen a significantly large uptick in API-based architectures. And so I'm predicting 2022 is going to be the year of the API, where organizations are now going to really seriously start figuring out what do they need to do to secure their APIs. If you think about it, the reason the log4j issue kind of arises is from the bad habit that software development has gotten into of reusing components without really understanding the implications of what they're reusing, how they're reusing it. We're also building software with very small bite-sized component that can interact with various different things. You can have an API that can interact with your web application, your mobile application, your thermostat at home, your smart car, and so on and so forth. So the consequences of building API-based software systems, bite-sized systems that are getting stitched together to do more and more, creating different complexities. It's going to get a lot more focused now, because I think organizations are starting to realize how heavily dependent they are on this type of architecture. And you have to be dependent on this type of architecture if you truly want to scale and build systems that are robust and scalable and so on. So my prediction is API security and API security strategy is going to become one of the top priorities in the application security space starting 2022. But in addition to what both of you alluded to and stole my thunder, in all honesty, is I wanted to talk about the whole challenge we have around organizations not really thinking of security holistically yet. They're thinking of still security as being a gate that they can introduce into their SDLC at one point, or maybe 2 or 3 points, but they have to get away from that and think about the fact that you need to introduce security touch points throughout your SDLC. We have to move away from thinking of shift left. You also have to shift right in conjunction with shift left. So you're shifting everywhere. And the reason this becomes very important, the struts issue highlighted this, and now the log4j issue highlights this, is that you need to have an automated way of having inventory of your different software components and also your open source components. You have to be able to query and determine what version of different systems you're using. You have to be able to very quickly create some sort of a firewall rule in case a 0-day pops up that doesn't have a mitigation or remediation, to be able to block that from being exploited so you can protect your organization or protect your systems. These are all things happening more on the right side, not on the left side. Traditionally, we would always say we have to shift left. Let's get as far early as possible and then start there. That's still a good thought process, and I think we still need to continue doing that. But we also have to now start focusing on shift right. Maybe we have to look at technologies beyond web app firewalls. Maybe we have to start looking at the viability of RASP solutions for real-time application self-protection and see if that makes sense in certain scenarios. We have to start thinking of how do you integrate IAST into the QA testing process, so you have sort of a partner who's helping you do security checks, but in a very seamless fashion as you're part of your normal QA cycle. So you can find vulnerabilities earlier and fix them earlier. So all of these need to work together. And I think that's just highlighted more and more by the log4j issue. And we really need to learn from it better this time and determine what the right approach is to come up with a solution so we're protected for the next big thing that comes up.
Hey, Nabil, I have a question for you that it's a little bit in the weeds, so forgive me for putting you on the spot a little bit. But one thing that we notice on the business development side when we're speaking to our clients, they don't really understand enough of the breadth of the type of testing that they need to do, because it seems like there's so much to bite off and so much to consider. And look, the truth is, whereas, at NetSPI, probably more of our penetration testing is on the application side than on the networks, but still, we're seeing, especially with our net new opportunities that we speak to, they don't have a starting point. Like, what would be, so my question to you is, what would be like a starting point for a type of test to start at least getting ideas down on paper? So maybe not necessarily just a, like a technology test, but what about from a process perspective? What would be some of the things for a company that's never addressed application security at that level? What can they do to start?
One thing that I've been talking to a lot of people about is around starting really small. But let's pick your highest priority thing and let's figure out how to inoculate against that one priority risk or the highest priority risk item. So I've seen a few companies do this really well, especially some tech companies and some financial services that are starting to mature more. They have done this at a very rudimentary level, but it's worked out in their favor. A simple example may be, remote code execution, right? The log4j 0 days, a remote code execution issue. Maybe you determine that you, as a business, can never have a remote code execution vulnerability in your software systems. Let's just start there. Forget about OWASP top 10, SANS top 25. They're all too many. Let's start with one, right? Start with one and build a group of, or build an initiative to internally really market and message to everyone at their appropriate level. Like, give out mouse pads that say remote code execution is bad. Click here to learn more, right? Or here's the link to learn more. Put posters up that talk about how you protected the company against a remote code execution attack, right? And start educating people at all levels, because ultimately security is everyone's responsibility. So if you're starting, you can start very small, pick one vulnerability or two vulnerabilities, and start building a culture around it so the whole company has a really good understanding of what the vulnerability is, and hopefully it's interesting enough and it gets people thinking far ahead enough. You may not have it with everyone, but even if you have it with 5% or 10% of your organization, you are now building a culture of security. And then you can start having people ask more questions like, hey, how do I know if I coded remote code execution, right? What tools can you provide me so I can make sure I can go check for it? Or what tools do you have so that I can protect my applications from this particular vulnerability? So that's what I tell people. Instead of starting with a top, X number of items as a list that you're trying to explain to everyone, start really small and start with one. And hopefully you can then start figuring out how to build processes or how to improve your various processes. You might have a process for writing software requirements, and in that you make sure everyone who's writing software requirements understand how to write requirements that tell developers not to code remote code execution. Then in the development phase, you make sure developers have real-time access to training, so when they do by mistake create a vulnerability, they can go take a 2-minute 3-minute training module and learn about the vulnerability. You train the QA testers on how to do risk-based testing and give them an arsenal of test cases they can run to fix that vulnerability or detect that vulnerability, and so on and so forth, right? So start small, start with one, and build up and expand from there.
Nabil, earlier you were talking about sort of software composition analysis, right, and all of the different libraries and understanding what the assets were, and you mentioned open source. What are your thoughts? And I guess it's to you and to Fernando as well, but around open source trust scores, knowing who the individuals are that are associated with open source packages. I mean, when you look at the sort of preponderance of utilization of open source packages across even commercial solutions, at the end of the day, you may know who is responsible or accountable for doing pull requests in those, but contributing the code. Like, do you foresee that we'll ever get to a point where there'll be a need to sort of KYC the people that are contributing to these to the code base, and then if we do, then how do you keep open source open, right? It's a bit of a conundrum. And what's your thoughts?
So my thoughts on this is, we will always have open source, and people will always go copy paste something off the internet that is inherently dumb or doing something stupid or is a mistake, and so on. So it's it's unavoidable. What I would say is, for enterprises that are building software that enable them to do business better, they need to start figuring out, how do you build a secure development framework that will have the capability to detect and report when developers are using something that either is not approved, or even if it's approved, if it all of a sudden has some sort of flaw or vulnerability in it that didn't exist before. So open source code will still need to be scanned. It should go through the same type of scrutiny as your regular code that you're developing in-house. Just because you may not want to invest the resources in fixing anything you find, doesn't mean you should not be looking for those to understand if vulnerabilities exist in the software components that you're integrating. So, I think it's really, really, really important to build platforms that will give you inherently secure feature functionality and take away the onus of certain security controls being manually implemented by the software developer, but actually has that built into the platform and framework, so you don't have certain vulnerabilities. A simple example of that is React.js, right? People were trying to templatize, and be able to really quickly build UIs that are very robust. And if you happen to use React, it prevented you from having certain vulnerabilities like CSRF and cross-site scripting.
Thanks. And I know we're running short on time, so I wanted to sort of teeing off of that. You talked about, your exposure, right? We've talked about exposure. We've talked about understanding your assets and so forth, and APIs. And one area that's been sort of top of mind for me a lot lately, that I'm making a prediction about, is that SaaS architecture is obviously, everybody's using them. People are going to continue to use them to a much greater degree, especially with all of the remote work that's going on. And when you look at that shared responsibilities model, a lot of times, the people that are really employing and to an extent administering those environments are not sitting within IT. They're not sitting within cybersecurity. They're sitting within the line of business. And so I think SaaS posture management is going to get front and center for a lot of people, because there is a measure of it with a lot of SaaS platforms. We think about the M365s, the Salesforces of the world, and things like that. There's a lot of capability that you as the tenant have to configure your environment the way that you want and need it to, that certainly, again, from that shared responsibilities model, ends up being on you. And how do you know that those things are configured correctly? More importantly, how do you know that they stay configured correctly? So SaaS posture management, I think, is going to be a pretty big one next year as well.
I can certainly back you up on that. We have a lot of interest in especially M365 configuration reviews and so on. And I thought it would be easy to sell. Not even close. So we have not only our, we have our cloud team involved. We have a number of others from various groups within NetSPI helping to come up with a response to this, which, by the way, coincides with my prediction before about this cybersecurity spend. So it tracks, Travis, with what we're seeing on the business development side.
And another one, when we talk about next gen architecture, so this is the one that I'm pretty passionate about, and I'm not ashamed to say I get a lot of good ribbing around NetSPI around, and that's blockchain related technology. It's
I'm a convert. I'm a convert, Travis.
I've been doing my work. When I talk about this space, inevitably people end up rolling their eyes and be like, "Oh my God, he's talking about Bitcoin." And while, you know, public cryptocurrency systems and everything that's going on in that space is certainly you know, an event of its own, and a pretty large and interesting one that I think will factor in fairly prominently when you look at the New York bank that just issued its own stable coin, when you look at FedNow and what they're doing with respect to trying to implement digital currency and payment platforms. You look at the digital dollar project that Accenture is running. It's pretty, or helping with, I should say. It's a pretty interesting space on kind of the currency and the finance side. But what we're actually seeing is that there are a lot of people that are actually interested in the underlying technology, the distributed ledger technology. So when you look at companies like Consensus and their CodeFly platform, R3's Corda, Linux Foundation's Hyperledger platform, there are a lot of companies, or a lot of organizations, or I should say groups of organizations or consortiums that are starting to leverage this technology to solve a variety of problems that allow them to interact in ways that perhaps they would not have been able to do, or do efficiently previously. And so I think that one is an area that, is it going to be huge in 2022? I think we'll see a notable amount of growth. Is it going to be the biggest thing on the stage? Probably not. But I think it's one of those things, and the reason why I want to make it a prediction, I think it's one of those things that security teams, security organizations are going to have to start paying attention to, going to have to start ramping up on, because while there are overlaps with respect to the methodologies used to test, you know, where that stuff is deployed from an infrastructure perspective, the apps that sit on top of them, and so forth, there are some unique differences that will change your, you know, your operating processes and how you go about testing these, especially when you're deploying them in a distributed fashion with, you know, with the kinds of consensus algorithms that get put into place. It's not the same. And there are some uniqueness there, especially when you start looking at distributed file systems and so forth. So my prediction is that we will see that space start to grow more than it is now. Probably half of our clients have represented, and top 200, I should say, clients have referenced in some capacity an interest in this space. So I think we'll continue to see that, and the testing methodologies around it really need an acumen uplift.
I have a follow-up for that, if you would please. I don't know if this actually applies, but correct me if I'm wrong. The gain in popularity in cryptocurrency is drawing attention to the technology. My question for you is, how much of that is having an impact, would you guess, right? Because who really knows, on the risk to blockchain technology because it is becoming more prevalent? Give you an example, stupid example, but I'll give you an example. Back when people would say that Apple was unhackable, right? You know, don't use Windows, use Apple because it's unhackable. Well, the reason for that was more so that all the bad guys were paying attention to Windows, not Apple. But now with blockchain becoming more and more known, or at least you know, people are showing interest in it, what do you think? How is that going to look with regard to you know, the threat landscape?
I think it's actually going to be a very compelling and interesting story, because when you look at the public cryptocurrency space and public blockchain space, the threat actors are already there. I mean, look at a lot of the compromises that have happened. Just yesterday, CoinMarketCap got hacked, and it led to pricing looking like people were trillionaires, you know, overnight. You've seen a number of exchanges get hacked, and smart contracts get hacked, and millions and millions of dollars fleeced. So just hearing that the acumen for attacking this technology by threat actors is already well cultivated. What we don't have is the same measure of acumen cultivation by the defenders. And so that's really my sort of call to action is, if this technology is going to be in play in your space, then you need to make sure that your teams understand how it operates, where it's unique, how it's unique, and what you need to defend it effectively, and get that acumen development in place, because the bad guys already have it.
Do you foresee, Travis, organizations starting to use blockchain for creative new purposes? And what purposes do you think blockchain would be suited for that people are not seeing today?
I think like a lot of technologies, I think people will try to use a technology to they'll try to find a problem just to use the technology. It has its place, and I think that place is sort of in line with what it is designed to do. When you need a distributed database where you cannot trust all parties for a variety of reasons that are participating. So creative space. I don't have anything off the top of my head, but just anecdotally in some of the research, there are insurers that are participating in consortiums in this health insurance, in consortiums to look at people submitting multiple claims for the same issue. Right, they're double dipping across multiple policies, and things like that. I think that there are a lot of interesting things that go along with that when you start to talk about privacy legislation, right? So if I've got a relationship with one insurer, healthcare insurer, and I'm submitting, that data to them, and I'm not trying to double dip, but they're then turning around and sharing that data with other insurers to make sure I'm not trying to double dip. Are they sharing their data, outside of something that I may have agreed to? And so I think that there'll be some interesting, there's a lot of interesting there just beyond the tech that I think people are going to have to pay attention to when it comes to setting up those types of consortium environments. I think that there are a lot of opportunities for internal chains where you need distributed data, that this could be advantageous, but it's certainly not a piece of technology you want to just run around and try and find some way to throw it in just so you can say you've done it.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. That's quite insightful, and I'm excited to see what happens with the blockchain space. I'm trying to learn more and follow it actively, and I've reached out to you to help me get some more resources so I can continue learning.
Yep.
So next, we want to talk about cybersecurity hiring. Our fearless leader, Charles Horgan, who's the COO of NetSPI, he was supposed to come and provide us with his predictions in the hiring space. He unfortunately got stuck in travel, in the middle of travel, so he's not here. I'll do my best to represent him, and hopefully I do him justice. So one of his predictions is around the Great Resignation, and how there's a significant problem and focus today around the global supply chain and the services sector, with people resigning from their jobs and not necessarily taking on a new opportunity. So in security itself, we know that there has been somewhat of a negative unemployment rate for many decades now, and we believe that the gap is only going to keep widening. So there's more and more demand for people and resources in the cybersecurity space, and we're going to really start seeing more of that impact very soon. In with the pandemic, we've seen certain shifts in things like working from home, getting more flexibility, finding more of a work-life balance, and so on, which are changing how people view their workplace and what they're looking for from their employers. So, we've seen a big shift with the fact that employees now, they don't only value compensation, or they don't only value one or two things. There's a list of things that they care about. Things like whether the company is sponsoring their growth with additional training and education opportunities. Is there some sort of a flexible work structure where you can work from home and work from the office as needed, or based on your personal needs? Is the company accommodating how you're going to work and where you're going to work? Are there opportunities for growth and career development? Do you get active mentorship and support from your organization to enable you to grow? Or is there additional dedicated time for research and development? Can you get time to work on your pet projects and other creative things so you can innovate and you're not just grinding out there doing the same thing over and over again? Do you get flexibility from a paid time off perspective? Are the bonus structures performance based, and how are they being applied to you and your particular job that you're in? And then of course the big one that Charles always talks about is company culture. In order for any company to be successful and have the ability to retain their staff, the culture is key. Ultimately, all of the factors above don't really matter unless you have the culture that supports and enables organizations enable people to be successful in the roles they're in. So, in order to achieve this, obviously this requires dedicated focus and investment, because it's not just going to happen by magic. It requires an intention, so you can actually go and build this culture that people are going to want to be part of. And ultimately, the with remote employees, you have to now figure out, how do you extend that culture to them even though they're remote? How will they feel proud to wear your logo on their t-shirt or on their backpack? And when they see people, are they talking about how their organization is supporting them and differentiating what they do? So the prediction is, organizations, in order to be successful, they will really, really need to start focusing on all of the things mentioned here in order to differentiate and harbor an environment where people want to stay and continue working. Any thoughts on this, Travis or Florendo?
Yeah, so I one completely agree. I think we'll continue to see people choose to prioritize a healthy lifestyle and a fulfilling lifestyle over just, as you put it, grinding it out, right? And no doubt that will continue. I think I think we talk about talent shortage, and I know you and I have got some opinions and have debated this. I think we agree, but we also agree in sort of different ways. I think that there are a lot of roles, especially in cybersecurity, where we've focused on looking at university graduates, right? And there's and understandably so for a lot of roles. I mean, you look at the NetSPI program, great programs, helped us to cultivate a ton of talent, right? And with a lot of your highly complex roles, you definitely want to look at folks that have gone through formal education, things like that. But there are a lot of roles that I think don't require that. And what I don't think that we do as an industry is really cultivate that well. I think there's a ton of opportunity, especially in disadvantaged communities, to be able to create that structure, that learning opportunity to give people, you take a SOC analyst, right? I mean, you can train somebody up to be a SOC analyst in 6 months, and that's a pretty good compensation, depending on where you are, right? And you'd be able to get somebody into a gainful, employment that is, not in a minimum wage role. And so I think that my piece around this is always, we've got a bit of a shortage because we're missing the mark when it comes to cultivating that talent across all of the spectrum of roles that are available within the cybersecurity space. And there are a lot of companies that are doing better than others that you and I know about, that where they are trying to reach out and they've developed programs for that. These tend to be larger organizations that have the capacity to do that, right? But I think as an industry and as a society, we need to do a better job in that space.
Nabil,
go ahead.
No, please. So Nabil, you brought up something really interesting before about the culture. I know this is not a prediction from me, but it is a piece of advice. Being a hiring manager who is frantically looking for people, right? Because NetSPI is growing explosively, right? And we're hiring like crazy. My advice to people who are looking for a job, focus on the culture of the company you want to work for. Your talent will be recognized, right? And if you are speaking to the right company, like as if you were speaking to us, we take a lot into consideration in terms of your potential, right? Just like Travis said with education. But I will say that my biggest challenge is, and it's funny because when I'm speaking to a candidate, I tell them up front, I'm going to try to convince you not to work here, and here's the reason why, right? I say it euphemistically, right? Or I say it with tongue in cheek, but I talk about the culture and how tight knit we are here, and it's shown especially in our services team and in our sales team, very, very close knit. And those during the pandemic that worked at home, we really enjoyed getting together, right? When we go up to Minneapolis and we all get together for the dinners and happy hours. And for Travis, just real quick, you talked about cultivating. I used to volunteer when I lived in the Northeast. I used to volunteer at the City University of New York for New York City, and they had a program there called America Needs You, and that's exactly what they did. Inner city youth, disadvantaged youth, cultivating them for the business world. And I would go and pitch, hey, you want to work in cybersecurity? Let's start training you up on that. Let's be a mentor to you. And I see NetSPI taking a leadership role in that type of thing. And it's heartening. And I think that although, yes, there is a shortage of people, I do think that at least with us, and I know it sounds kind of odd because we work for NetSPI, but I truly mean this. I like what we're doing here, and I like the approach that we're taking. The industry as a whole needs to open up.
And this is where we get to tee up Nabil's controversial position on this that I always enjoy.
Well, before that, I want to first of all say it's impressive, Florendo. You've managed to use our webinar as a recruiting effort to try and get more people to apply for your job openings. So,
ABC, my friend, always be selling, right?
Well, the prediction that I had, which is not as controversial as you would think once I explain it, but at first it seems controversial, which is I don't think we have a talent shortage, and that's because I think we have a problem with how we are hiring that gives us the sense that there's this talent shortage. And there are a couple of different aspects to this that I think a lot of people have focused on. There are organizations now, for example, focusing on hiring and enabling neurodiversity within their organization to enable more people to be able to do certain roles and give them responsibilities that they can manage. I also think the pandemic has highlighted the fact that you can be remote and still be equally, if not more effective than being in an office for certain roles. It may not work for everything, but it's highlighted that you can maybe now start hiring in other parts of the world and get more resources to do a job which may not require them to be in the same country as you are, or may not require them to be in the same city or in the same office as you are. So it's opening up and kind of blurring some boundaries that we had maybe subconsciously put around certain job descriptions and how we were hiring, that made it seem like there was a scarcity and shortage of certain types of people. And from that perspective too, I think a key focus, and this is my prediction, organizations that are going to be successful in hiring cybersecurity professionals, they're going to have to really, really change their hiring process and stop making job descriptions and interview process, etc., in certain ways that prohibit certain people from applying or disqualify certain people from getting the role, which are completely arbitrary. A simple example would be, just because I don't have 40 years of Java experience doesn't mean I don't know Java. and Java's only been around for 26 years or 27 years. So, if you're creating job descriptions and putting certain years of experience as the measure of how good you are at something, then you're also kind of disqualifying a lot of candidates that may be fully capable, but they may on paper not have the right qualifications to do the work. Similarly with certifications and degrees that Travis you mentioned, right? A lot of job descriptions I see say things like must have this certification, and then there's like a list of like 20 alphabets of like 10 different certifications that just show up there. I don't know how you can expect certifications to be the only benchmark, right? The way I see it is, yeah, certification is great for you to show that you have knowledge in an area and you were able to pass an exam. It doesn't necessarily show how good you are, and lack of a certification doesn't show how good you are or how bad you are, right? It's like the opposite, Travis, of what we used to call a badnessometer, right? So the lack of a vulnerability in your system doesn't mean your system is flawless. It just means you didn't try all the test cases, or you may not have done the right type of testing. It just means it's not as bad, but it doesn't mean it's good. So similarly, the certification problem is another thing I see. So organizations, I think, will really, really need to rethink their hiring strategy in order to be able to get the right people and fill all the cybersecurity demand that we have today. Any
I
thoughts
think
there?
I think part of it also, the older generation in IT, and I could say that because I'm one of them, right? Although I don't follow this philosophy, there's a lot of gatekeeping going on. This is the way we've always done it. These are the people we've always hired, right? And they don't realize, I mean, even with college degrees today, right? I mean, I remember my children were trying to hack my computer, my home computer, and they were 4 years old because they would watch me do it. And, for clients, and suddenly I'd have to password protect all of my stuff at home, right? We don't cultivate that, right? We need to look at that. Neurodiversity is a big one. I also think women and minorities, and also gender fluid people that don't feel comfortable because they feel like, because there's a lot of intimidation and so on. There's so much talent out there that we're not pursuing, we're not considering. I absolutely agree with you, Nabil. I could spend an entire hour talking about this as well. So.
Yeah, I think ultimately it ends up being a mix of both of them, right? What Nabil, what you said, in that, frankly, HR and recruiting teams need to do better. Your security SMEs are not recruiters. They're not HR people. They're going to tell you what they need to be part of their team to help them be successful. It really is, in my opinion, incumbent upon those HR teams to really take that and not just slap it into a template and send it out and say, okay, we're off to the races, but really try to understand and distill. Just as much as we in cybersecurity are constantly challenged to know the business, HR partners need to know the business. And that's not just wherever your business is making money, but also how do your people operate? What do they need to be successful? And so between that and trying to cultivate some of the talent, again, in disadvantaged communities and things like that, for those roles that would work for that, I think are a couple of areas where, one, we should, to your prediction, see some changes there, hopefully see some changes there. And then, hopefully, and this is more of a heartfelt desire than a prediction, that we will, as an industry and as a society, try to create those opportunities for people where we know that there's the work is there. We just need the people, right? We need to create the training and the opportunity to make that happen.
And then just to add to what both of you said too, I actually think, Travis, it's a shared responsibility still, where the hiring managers also have to enable the HR and the recruiters to put the job descriptions together correctly. And this is where I often find this, I'm always torn, because in today's culture, people often equate the term manager with the term leadership. but not all managers are good leaders.
That's
And
correct.
not all leaders have management responsibilities. So,
Right.
I think in order to be successful, what I will say is organizations need to identify leaders and put them in management roles and give them management level responsibilities so they can continue to grow and harbor and make others successful around them. So it's going to be, that whole culture and the growth opportunity, etc. I think ultimately you also have to recognize leaders within your organization and enable them to help you scale and grow the business.
Great dialogue. Tori, how are we doing on time?
We are at time, so I'm gonna just wrap it up. We'll skip the Q&A portion today just because I know everybody is busy in the security world. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'll answer any questions that come through post webinar via email or on social. Feel free to reach out to us. You can also connect with us for any penetration testing, adversary simulation, or attack surface management needs in the new year by reaching out to sales@netspy.com. Thank you all again, and thank you to the esteemed panelists. I thought that was a fantastic conversation to listen in on. And if you have any questions, again, reach out to us via the channels I just mentioned, or keep in touch via the webinar site on netspy.com. We'll also send out a recording of this to everybody who had registered and attended, so you can share it with your peers, rewatch it, so on and so forth. But thank you all again, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Awesome.